So our next presentation is by Marta. Again, Professor Adam McCormick is the mentor, and the title of this presentation, which I will play for you, is Exploring the Relationship Between Conformity and Masculine Norms and Disordered Eating Behaviors in Men. So I'm going to go ahead and kick this off. If questions come to you while the presentation is rolling, please feel free to put those in the chat, and we will look at them as soon as our presentation ends. And as always, just a quick thumbs up so that I know you can hear everything okay once we get started here.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Marta Piotrowicz. I am a senior studying psychology and sociology, and my thesis is about a research experiment I launched that examines the relationship between conformity to masculine norms and disordered eating behaviors in men. Due to the recent circumstances with the pandemic, I was unfortunately unable to attain enough participants to yield any significant data or results. So this thesis will be a brief overview of the literature surrounding this topic, as well as an introduction to my interdisciplinary study I launched back in February. So let's get started. So the purpose of the objective here was to investigate how society influences the development of eating disorders and how such disorders shape men's identity and adaptational outcomes. This includes examining protective factors and resiliency. So the first thing I want to do before I really delve into my project is to differentiate between eating disorders and disordered eating. So in order to have an eating disorder, one must display a specific number of symptoms in order to fit the criteria for a specific disorder. Having an eating disorder requires a diagnosis, and many times this is problematic for men specifically because a lot of the eating disorder criteria were formulated around the experiences of women. So those criteria are more specific to them, but I'll cover that more shortly. Eating disorders involve disordered eating that leads to abnormal daily functioning due to an obsession with food. This obsession includes thoughts that are all-consuming, where the individual thinks about calories, where to buy a food, or how to avoid food, different tastes and smells, and different things like that. So as you can infer, this level of obsession can definitely impair focus, the ability to stay present, the ability to sleep, and many other aspects of one's daily life. On the other hand, disordered eating includes a wide range of irregular eating behaviors. This includes frequent dieting, anxiety associated with specific foods or meal skipping, chronic weight fluctuations, feelings of guilt and shame associated with eating, a preoccupation with food, weight, and body image that negatively impacts the quality of life, a feeling of loss of control around food, which can include compulsive eating habits, and using exercise, food restriction, fasting, or purging to quote-unquote make up for bad foods consumed. Furthermore, I wanted to define toxic masculinity as well, since it is the other half of my research. And just from the definition alone, you can kind of see that there are many problems associated with it. So I was kind of curious to see how that actually factors into disordered eating patterns. So Oxford English Dictionary defines toxic masculinity as a cultural concept of manliness that glorifies stoicism, strength, virility, and dominance, and that is socially maladaptive or harmful to mental health. So to go over the background of disordered eating studies, disordered eating studies that included males started around the 1990s and many researchers came across the same conclusion when comparing the male experience to the female experience. This led them to propose the femininity hypothesis, which states that the feminine role endorsement is a risk factor for body dissatisfaction and disordered eating. This was heavily based on studies of gay and heterosexual men and women, where the results indicated that gay men and straight women were most highly at risk for developing disordered eating patterns and report body dissatisfaction. This led researchers to believe that increased endorsement of masculine gender roles actually helps protect against the development of eating disorders. However, recent researchers found these conclusions problematic, probably due to the rise of men with eating disorders. For one, not all gay men were feminine, so it would be wrong to attribute their body dissatisfaction to this. Further research also found that men and women exhibit disordered eating very differently. Males, rather than being preoccupied with thinness like females, they're more likely to be preoccupied with body composition. For example, their muscle to fat ratio. And so the diagnostic criteria that was designed for women excluded a very large portion of the male population struggling with disordered eating, just in a very different way. So a quote I have here by Griffiths is, "Although the predictions of this theory may have been supported in studies of women, there is a growing body of evidence that suggests that the masculine gender role endorsement may represent a risk factor for muscularity-oriented body dissatisfaction and disordered eating in men." And this, in my opinion, makes sense because if you think about the traditional masculine gender norms, for example, dominance or sexual success or emotional self-control, just to name a few, you can imagine that men who possess such qualities are encouraged or even pressured to increase their muscle mass as a way to non-verbally communicate that masculine quality to others. So I have here two studies about masculinity and bodies. So the first one was conducted in France, which included 328 French normal weight university students. And when asked about their body satisfaction, 85% reported some level of dissatisfaction with their muscularity. Similar results appeared in college sample in Kuwait, where 400 students were asked about their body dissatisfaction, and 67.3% reported dissatisfaction with their muscle mass, and 69% were dissatisfied with their body fat. So as you can see, it is more than half of the male population is very dissatisfied with their body types. And based on these results, one can argue that the behavior most relevant for males with body image and or eating disturbances is compulsive or excessive exercising, as opposed to purging or other compensatory behaviors seen in women. Another study by Franco and others revealed that greater conformity to masculine norms had higher scores on measures of body change attitudes, which included a drive for thinness, desire for leanness, and a desire for muscularity. Data obtained from 624 male students from Spain showed that scores high in masculinity were correlated with a greater drive for muscularity and less eating concerns, which suggests that disordered eating behaviors are not necessarily prominent in this particular sample, yet the drive for muscularity is. Another quote from Mitchison and Mond states that excessive exercise may be more prevalent in younger cohorts, with 5.6% of males in the survey of 18 through 35-year-olds on a health plan in the USA reporting often exercising to lose weight following a binge eating episode. So it is definitely very prevalent within our culture, yet most people aren't even aware of it. Even men who have it, they're not aware of it. Many reports stated that as many as a third of men suffer from some form of an eating disorder. So in terms of the relationship between masculinity and mental health, I think the data speaks for itself, and I'm about to share that with you guys in a second. So there has been numerous amounts of study in this area, and they all lead to the conclusion that it is incredibly harmful for men to hold strong masculine ideals. I'm going to walk you through some of the quotes I have here. The first quote I have is from Springer and Mauzan that states that men with strong masculinity beliefs are half as likely as men with more moderate masculinity beliefs to receive preventative care. The likelihood of seeking or getting preventative health care decreases as their occupational status, wealth, and or income increases, which may explain their lower life expectancy than women. Vogel et al. Second that notion and attribute it to self-stigma, stating that endorsement of dominant masculine ideals is related to higher levels of self-stigma and less favorable attitudes towards seeking help. The results showed that the prominent role of self-stigma in exacerbating the underutilization of counseling service by men. And if you could just imagine having a disorder that is largely labeled as a female disorder, I can definitely see why men would not want to seek help as an effect of that. So due to this lack of help-seeking behaviors, men are faced to deal with all of their problems themselves. There have been several studies conducted to show how high scores on masculine norms affect them. And they revealed that men with such high scores exhibit greater substance abuse, greater rates of depression. One study even concluded that as much as 69% of depressed males reported dealing with the problem themselves. Greater risks of anxiety, higher rates of suicide. Prisker et al. Found that males make up over 80% of suicide victims between the age of 10 and 24. There's greater aggression and violence, and as stated earlier, lower rates of help seeking. So this really reiterates the self-reliant norm that men are pressured to uphold. And this suppression of emotion truly does a lot of harm on their overall well-being. You can even argue that while many more females are dissatisfied with their bodies and suffer from eating disorder, men suffer more psychologically, which in turn impacts their eating behaviors. So now that I've covered some of the background of masculinity and bodies and mental health, I wanted to introduce you to my study so you can get a sense of what I'm looking for. The first is the Dutch Eating Behaviors Questionnaire, to which the participants will respond on a scale that ranges from never to very often. This scale is used to assess the 3 distinct eating behaviors commonly seen in adults, which are restrained, emotional, and external eating. And I've also included some of the questions from my actual study to help you kind of grasp what each one entails. Up next, there is the Conformity to Masculine Norm Scale that consists of 46 questions regarding these following topics. And since there isn't a scale that's specifically designed to test toxic masculinity, I tried my best to choose the categories and questions that most closely reflect toxic masculinity. So I have emotional control, playboy or sexual success, violence, self-reliance, risk-taking, power over women, and heterosexual self-presentation. Next, there's the Sociocultural Attitudes Towards Appearance Questionnaire, which looks at the external pressures to uphold specific beauty standards. This reflects personal goals of looking a certain way, as well as peer, family, and media pressures and influences. And lastly, on the right here is the resilience scale. Resilience is the capacity to recover quickly from tough situations or difficulties. So I wanted to see if there's a correlation between resilience and masculine conformity. Some of these questions even kind of sound like the masculine norms we've previously seen. Like, for example, the second one here, I am able to depend on myself more than anyone else. So I'm really interested to see the data that comes out of that. So now that you've gotten a sense of what I'm measuring within my study, I figure now is a good time to introduce my hypothesis near the end here. So I predict that individuals who score high on the masculine conformity scale will also score high on sociocultural attitudes towards appearance and report lower resilience. I also predict that emotional eating would be the most prevalent among this population. So yeah, here's the majority of what I've been doing this past semester. Thank you all for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the thesis other students have prepared for y'all. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Marta. And again, please feel free, send those questions in. I'm going to turn this over back to Dr. McCormick to say a few words about Marta and the research we just learned about.
Thanks so much. Marty did a fantastic job with this study. I'll say just along we started talking about this study well over a year ago, and I think it's been pretty close to that long. And it's just amazing her ability to plan and operationalize and be a visionary with some of this research. And I hope you're able to see that in what she's done here and looking at some things that really no other researchers have looked at, especially at the level and the depth that she's done here. So I'm really excited about her being able to finish this project in the coming months when things get back to normal. But Marty, we're really, really proud of you. You've been a wonderful student. For any of our instructors who are in this group, I'm sure I can speak for all of you, have enjoyed having you in class. I've enjoyed your brilliance and your insight and kindness and compassion in class, and congratulations.
Thank you, Dr. McCormick.
Excellent. It looks like our first question has come in. What influenced you to decide to focus on this project?
So I was actually in my abnormal psychology class, my first semester at St. Edward's, and we were talking about eating disorders, and there was a Mexican student who was a male, and he confessed to having one. He kind of talked about it, and I was very taken aback by that because I never known that people of color suffer from eating disorders. I knew men had it, but it was very rare. But I was very intrigued that a person of color had it. So that was my original topic, and that's what I wanted to focus on. But since the literature on that is so small, it was really hard to go anywhere with it and to get participants to, get involved in that project. So I had to open it to everyone, and yeah, it was a really, really cool experience.
I have a question while we give everyone else a chance to type and to find the chat window and all of that. When I was in high school, my math teacher was telling us about being a high school wrestler and a college wrestler. And I remember him talking to us about being anorexic because he had to stay in a particular weight class. So I'm curious if in your reading, kind of in your literature review, if you've seen conversation, are there particular sports that seem to increase the incidence among men? Just curiosity.
What I saw the most is bodybuilders came up a lot. And I think wrestling was the second one that came up because you have to hold that certain weight. But yeah, I was very surprised to see bodybuilders on the list.
Yeah, we think of them as being very, specific in their nutrients rather than restricting so much.
Yes.
Or maybe not. We'll give folks a few more moments. Oh, that's a note for me. Let me fix something here. Is there anything else that's been surprising? You were noting earlier that you were surprised about the lack of scholarship on men of color.
Yeah, I think that's what surprised me the most is I tried to grab literature from all different parts of the world to kind of show you that similar pattern, but there was just a lack of literature on Mexicans, any Latino, any Black Americans. And it was hard to, whenever I did find literature, it was about women. So it was hard to attribute that. I try to piece together, well, are there more similar experiences between Black women and Black men, or is it completely different? So yeah, I think that would be the most surprising part for me, was finding literature that really captures how common this is among different races.
Thank you for answering that.
Mm-hmm.
Looks like we have a question directly for you. How did your mix of a psychology and social work studies influence your approach?
Well, I wanted to go from more of a sociological standpoint rather than social work, but I wanted to see how the outside kind of, how the outside world causes things to oneself that is harmful, if that makes any sense.
We got a follow-up here, or another question, I'm sorry. Did any of your research investigate differences of treatment or biases against men and people of color in eating disorder clinics?
Yes, there is a lot of different biases against men. They get rejected a lot because people just like don't believe that it's a disorder. They just believe it's more of like an eating problem, quote unquote, but it's, even if it's more than that, or people can simply not afford the cost of treatment because it's very expensive to afford it. So people of color just either don't bother with it, or they just don't get the right amount of help because of financial problems. So yeah, that was originally my other point I wanted to go with this research, was to go into the, like, talk to people who have actually went through the treatment, or if they got rejected, and if so, like, what did that make them feel like being labeled as this certain female disorder person and not getting treatment because of it. Like, I wanted to see the identity component come out of that, and like how that's internalized. But again, I wasn't able to do that because of the different, or, you know, the lack of people who were interested in that.
We have another question for you. Could you repeat again your findings about where men's eating disorders usually come from? You said women's are often influenced by the media. What did you say men's were influenced by the most?
Men are, well, the two risk factors for men with eating disorders is actually sexual orientation was one of them. So gay people are more likely to suffer from eating disorders. And the second one is that internalization of masculine norms. So like the need to look a certain way to, you know, work out and pass on that those masculine qualities to other people non-verbally. And yeah, I think that's the most common. Also, like pressures from people, pressures from, you know, the media also factors in, but it does look a lot different, where they're not as much obsessed with the food itself. It's more about the muscle gain and you know, looking a certain masculine way.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
We're going to have a few minutes, but we're going to send Marta off with a round of applause from our home to yours.
Thank you,
Thank you
everyone.
for sharing
Thanks
your
for being
time
here.
and